there were several weeks where it was just like 5 people, I remember seeing it at 12 people and being excited. Last week we had like 1,600 comments in 1 hour, like real humans. So like, it's completely different. I think consistency is key, like with everything in marketing. We just didn't care as much. Our whole point was to have fun and to learn and to help other people learn and to help us both like build our own personal brands.
Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hey, I'm Tristan. I'm the co-founder of Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. The show is brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. Sometimes the best way to start your company's podcast is by building some of these skills internally first. But how can you develop some of these skills within your marketing team? How can you take a few baby steps first before launching a big podcast initiative? In this episode, I have Jessie Lizak, the CMO at BDEX, which is a company that allows B2C companies to use data to reach the right people at the right time. And Jessie is the host of the company's podcast, Deconstructing Data. Before Jessie launched the company's show, she actually launched her own live event series to test the waters. And during this conversation, we uncover how her solo experience gave her the foundation needed to launch the company's podcast. Jessie, welcome to Recorded Content today.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, today's a special day for you. It's Wednesday, right? So that means something to you. And I know Wednesdays are special because of an event series that you created called Whiskey Wednesday. So tell me a little bit about what Whiskey Wednesday is.
Sure. Yeah. So Whiskey Wednesday is a show. It's a live broadcast that I put on equally with my partner, Eddie Bannum, and he's a co-host as well. And we bring on sales and marketing professionals, thought leaders that we, find on LinkedIn primarily, and ask them to come on to talk about, we call them hot topics. So hot sales and marketing topics, a lot of times around alignment. So a lot of our most popular shows will be those ones where we're getting into the really hard discussions about who owns what in terms of revenue between sales and marketing, primarily in B2B SaaS. But we also get into like sales or just marketing on some podcasts. But tonight we'll have our first all-women panel. Melissa Rosenthal, she's the Chief Creative Officer at ClickUp, along with Sam McKenna and Tara Gooch and Alexis Scott, all people you'll find on LinkedIn. But we'll be talking about, pitch slapping and DMs versus email, as well as like making B2B fun, which is really what Whiskey Wednesday, was our goal, Eddie and I, when we first set out to do it, was just to have fun.
Yeah. And Jessie, you're CMO, so you're busy, right? I mean, you're touching all aspects of marketing at BDEX. So let's rewind back to that day. Maybe it was a Tuesday and you said, hey, tomorrow I want to start this live event series. But what was the spark that said, okay, I want to explore a live event like this? What was that?
Well, I first was bringing up doing a podcast at BDEX internally, probably 2021 summer. And the CEO, David Finkelstein, asked me, well, have you ever put on a podcast? Do you know what it's going to take? And I'm like, man, really, I don't. And I started to feel insecure, even though I really felt like this was something BDEX needed. So then, I was really active on LinkedIn. And then I think it was winter that year. So last year, I can't remember if it was December or January, I met Eddie on LinkedIn. We were just DMing back and forth, hey, you want to meet for 15 minutes? We're both really active. We're engaging on each other's stuff a lot. So let's just meet and see how we can help each other. So we both started talking, and the way I remember it was he was start a podcast with me, but I think he thinks that I said start a podcast with him. So I'm either way, we both were thinking about podcasts before we met, I think. And then, we met each other and we're okay, yeah, what would we even talk about? And let's make it fun. We want to have fun. That's a goal. And we wanted it to be a little controversial. And so we decided well, we kept talking every week, him and I. And he's in sales and I'm in marketing. So we'd find ourselves talking about our day jobs and sales and marketing alignment. And we had like, man, we should just go live with this. Why don't we just go live and start talking like to the rest of the world? And so that was sort of how we started. And we tried to bring on 2 guests each time, someone in sales and someone in marketing to have these conversations with us. And we've just been completely consistent. And with that, I learned how to use StreamYard. So, $25 a month was what I used to get started with StreamYard. And then, the sky was the limit. It created a stage for Eddie and I. And that was the tool we used to start going live on. Well, I'll admit, first, actually, we started on Riverside, which I know is what we're on today.
Yeah.
But for Eddie and I, we wanted to be live on LinkedIn because we knew that was where our audience was. We met on LinkedIn. We both knew a bunch of people on LinkedIn. And going live on LinkedIn with Riverside was much more complicated. So we had a couple technical difficulties a few times where we're like, let's just find something new. And we moved to StreamYard for live broadcasts. And so that all took place and started about February of this year, so 2022. And then I can't remember. I'd have to go back. We're on about episode 30 now with Deconstructing Data. So I had a few months with Eddie just kind of playing on our own time in the evenings, primarily on Wednesdays, talking about B2B marketing for me, primarily sales for him and alignment together, just with people that we looked up to and also saw as up-and-comers. So it was really just whatever we wanted to do on Whiskey Wednesday, which is still happening. Like last week, we just had Justin Welsh for like, our minds are blown. We have sponsors now. Like it ruined this thing we never would have even imagined.
And I'm excited to figure out like how you've gotten to this point. I do want to ask though, like what, when you were talking with your CEO, like you mentioned a second ago, there was some skepticism there, right? Some uncertainty. Like, Jessie, you haven't really done something like this before. So what made you not only try to do a podcast, but then add this like live layer on top of it that added this complexity? Like, why did you say, I not only want to do, like a conversational series, but I want to also make it live and just add some complexity to it all?
Well, I mean, the honest answer is probably I just didn't really know any different. Also, like Eddie and I knew right away, as soon as like we started bringing on guests, that we should be on LinkedIn and we should be live, because him and I, like I said, it was natural. It was a natural fit for us. We met on LinkedIn. We both had large audiences. We're just highly active, not large audience. We don't have huge audiences ourselves, but we're just very active. And we are part of a lot of communities that will also like engage with each other's content on LinkedIn. And we knew that those communities would want to attend these. We just stumbled into it and it worked for us and our audience. But then I later figured out, like there, you can just get this Anchor thing. And then, Anchor, you can just get a RSS and tie that into Apple Podcast and Google Podcast and iHeart. And there's like all these different ones, right? Yeah. So we've never done that for Whiskey Wednesday because we never really needed to. Like our audience is on LinkedIn and now all the other social outlets. Not to say we can't. We still have all that audio. Yeah. So once we start to build, then that's definitely an option. We could go back and have someone edit all of that and put it on a podcast, which we should do. But for BDEX, I knew that getting to a podcast was the goal, but I was comfortable with StreamYard. So, I just made it happen with StreamYard and then just figured out the Anchor piece with, help from, actually he started as an intern. He was a teacher.
Okay.
His name's Josh Morgan. He's also really active on LinkedIn, but he ended up going to work for Dooley, but he started as an intern, like transitioning from being a teacher into like B2B SaaS. Yeah. He was doing marketing with me. He kind of helped me figure out the whole Anchor thing. It's easy. I think what it comes down to is like, just don't be scared. And I think that's sort of what I had going for me is like, I knew the podcast and the whole like idea of like organizing guests and coming up with topics and, having that was all really daunting. And I think that's what's daunting to most people. But for me, what was most daunting was figuring out the technicalities of it. Yeah. So like, how do I actually make this happen? And then how do I make it get to hear from like our conversation to like all these different places online? And then once I figured that out, I felt like the sky was the limit because finding guests is the fun part. Like organizing interesting conversations like this one and all the ones that you had, like same with Whiskey Wednesday, like that's still really fun. And getting to work with my partner, Eddie, we have a great time together. And he's a brilliant salesperson. So he's been able to take what we've put together and monetize it. And that's it. I closed deals too. So like I closed our first 4-figure deal. And once I did it, then boom, he was going, because I was forced to kind of be put into that revenue position, like as my own company, like revenuing, or like me and Eddie's. We started to learn a lot more even about what we were talking about with like B2B sales and marketing and alignment and who does what. Because with him and I, it's just the lines are so blurred. If I'm in a situation where I can sell a sponsorship, I'm going to sell the sponsorship.
Yeah.
And then, once I figure that out, then I'm going to go make a proposal, make it really beautiful, and then give it to Eddie. And Eddie's like taken that and like done so much with it, So like, it's been a really fun experience, just like living what we also talk about and also learning what we're doing, So like, that's a great part of that I love about podcasts or going live is just this chance to sit there and listen to people and learn so much from them and then get to use that and go back and build what we're doing. So, but with Deconstructing Data, it's been a different experience. It's like a different show, different vibe. It's not Whiskey Wednesday. It's a little more cut and dry in terms of like marketing and data and advertising and programmatic advertising and the cookieless future.
And Jessie, before we even get into Deconstructing Data, I wanted to ask you, like that decision process back when you launched Whiskey Wednesday with your partner, like why did you elect to go off and do something outside of BDEX versus like maybe making a stronger case with the CEO, say, no, I have a handle on this podcasting thing. I'm comfortable. Like what was that decision process like there?
That's a really good question. I probably could have, pushed a little harder at BDEX, but also like, I don't know what I don't know. So, I kind of felt like it was a responsible thing to do. Plus I had a partner who was willing to do it with me. And so I was just like, yeah, why not? We have fun together anyway. So why not just like have our conversations be put out there into the ether to help build our personal brands? Like inevitably, the way I saw it was that helped BDEX anyway. And, and now like I have relationships and sponsors that I've introduced to BDEX that I met at Whiskey Wednesday. So there has been a direct, benefit. It's all about building a personal brand to me. And so the way I saw it was like, it's a win-win either way, but this like at least allows me to stumble and be silly while I do it rather than taking like BDEX, what I saw as like a more professional brand, established brand, not established, it's still a startup, like started in 2014, but like, I felt a little insecure, I suppose, to just like go and start and like really push for something when I also didn't feel like I knew. Looking back, they probably should have just done it.
Yeah. And what was that first event like? Like how many people showed up? That's the one scary thing about going live is, you're just wondering, this is the first one that we're having. How many folks are actually going to dial in?
There were several weeks where it was just like 5 people, I remember seeing it at 12 people and being excited. Last week we had like 1,600 comments in 1 hour, like real humans. So like, it's completely different. I think consistency is key, like with everything in marketing. And, we just didn't care as much. Our whole point was to have fun and to learn and to help other people learn and to help us both like build our own personal brands. But like, honestly, the first 2 episodes, there were a lot of technical difficulties, like didn't post the LinkedIn event right. Then like you try to go live and it didn't really go live. So there's like some footage that like never even went live. Like, we had Jared Robin from Rev Genius on and it's like that one never like went live.
Yeah.
But, I think it's growing pains and I was able to struggle through that and laugh through it much easier and under a lot less pressure probably that I would have mostly put on myself.
But what part of the live experience, like, were you most uncertain about, like in the beginning? Was it opening the show or getting people involved? Like what were some of those early things that you had to really wrestle with?
Honestly, I think like for me, it was those technical things, it was like just making sure all the tools worked, like making sure that this thing I just like, because originally I got Riverside and it was like, what, $300 up front for the year or something. And then, that's a bummer. I spent that on my own dime and then like it didn't even end up doing what we wanted it to do. But, canceled that, moved on to StreamYard. But, yeah, it was just like probably because of having that just like upfront cost of like $300 of my own money, like,
Yeah.
like then I don't know, it was a technical thing. So just making sure it all worked. And then once I got past that, like I said, it felt like the sky was the limit because I had fun with everything else. Like my background when I was in high school was theater. I started college on a theater half art scholarship and then changed that because I was afraid I wasn't going to make money. So this allowed me to basically create my own stage and do what I wanted to do on things that interested me in this day and age in my life with Eddie. So it was really just all fun. It was just getting the technicality set up. And because we're B2B SaaS, there's like, you don't want to look like you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So to me, that was the part that was hard. It was just like getting set up. But now that we have our rhythm, once we have technicalities down, then we got the creative down because then I could bring in the art stuff and like make our border. And, there's a lot of pressure to like have your intro video like perfect because you're live, right? There's no time for editing. So we've got an intro, we've got an outro. We try to like keep it really engaging on the screen. And that allowed for a lot of creativity and it was fun. That I don't think you really do that in podcasts where it's more just like audio. So like I just fed into it because I enjoyed it.
And Jessie, how are you formulating for that weekly? And it is almost every week, right?
Every Wednesday.
And how are you formulating an agenda or a set of topics to go through each week?
We first pick our guests, and we set up a Calendly link. And then once the guests are finalized, we start a group direct DM in LinkedIn with all the guests and ourselves. And we let them choose 4 topics that, we say we want them to feel jazzed to talk about it. But we pick people in sales and marketing, primarily B2B. And so like, the topics that we have tonight, if the guests, like, if they don't end up sharing anything and they're just like, I can talk about anything, then I'll go listen to their podcast. Like Melissa Rosenthal, I went and listened to like her episode 22 of, her podcast and heard her talking about like making B2B fun and storytelling. So I'm like, let's talk about that. So like that we let the guests, we pick our guests and we spend a lot of like time trying to figure out who would be interesting to listen to in terms of sales and marketing topics. And then, we look at what they talk about and then we try to get them to talk about it.
Okay. And so you're doing this event every week and you're building some of these skills, right? With this live event series, you're in a rhythm. When do you know that, okay, it's time to now go back to the CEO and say, hey, I have some of these reps in place. I've learned a lot. Now it's time to, push forward and actually implement a podcast initiative at BDEX. Like when did you realize that?
So I think it was a couple months after. And luckily, we have, we work with an agency, Crackle PR at BDEX. And they're very knowledgeable, in the B2B space. And so like they were able to kind of help, cheerlead for the fact that like this actually would be a really great way to build our brand, even though it's like, it's not a traditional way to market, right? Podcasting. Like, so I understand that there's hesitation around it. If you're not someone who listens to podcasts, then you don't understand the value of it. But I really saw that our audience would be those people who would be listening to podcasts. And so, we packaged it up and they helped me a little bit with that in terms of like making me feel more confident that, yeah, you are right, Jessie. This would really benefit BDEX. And so, then I just was like, yeah, I think we should do this. And now I know I can do it. So,
and Jessie, when you're working with the CEO, at that point in time, you're working with your PR agency and there's some people are behind the idea. Like, what did you present? Was it a strategy document or like, how did the CEO say, okay, Jessie, you have your stuff together here. You got the green light. Like, what was that process?
I think by that point, I had proven myself. So I didn't really put anything together. I just had my points written down, bullet points. I kept it very simple. And also, took ownership of the fact that, yeah, it is going to take extra time. So, here's things that we're not going to be able to do anymore. So tried to be realistic about it. And also like set us up in the beginning. I was thinking, we'll build a huge backlog. Like we'll record a bunch of sessions and then we'll start publishing them. So like we have this huge backlog and we don't feel all this pressure that like I think he was nervous about, because I wanted the CEO to be on the podcast. And like, I think that's a bigger part of it too, is like, David is just more, I don't want to say a shy person. He's just not like, he's not the type to be like me, like a theater person who's like, hey, look at me. Let's talk about sales and marketing. Like, so
Right.
just different personalities, but brilliant. Like he's so smart. And that's why I knew from the beginning, if I could just get this man talking, like so many people are going to learn so much. And so like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like, does that answer the question? I can't even remember what
it does. And talk to me a little bit about deconstructing data and like how you were developing a theme or whatever to really connect with your audience. Like what was that initial goal like for deconstructing data? Definitely.
So, well, we are BDEX, was telling you before, it stands for Big Data Exchange. Been around since 2014, been helping, large enterprises and, large marketing agencies with their first party data and targeting and understanding their audience and reaching those audiences across multiple platforms in very programmatic ways. And so they've been doing that for a long time. So if you ask our founders, they'll be like, first party data has been better than third party cookies since 2014. They're like, so they have just been living this life of the first party data world. And so like, I really wanted to focus on that because I feel like a lot of marketers, especially in the US, aren't as aware of what's going on with data and how to properly target. And so if we could get them just talking about their experiences and bring on other people to help supplement that, then I thought it would help us reach our audiences. I wanted to be able to provide knowledge and value to people who might benefit from BDEX, because BDEX can help you take your first party customer data and then understand who those people are in terms of like their demographics. Like we have a complimentary tool. You can upload your CSV list into OmniIQ. And then, it'll tell you the gender, the household income, and the birth year of your audience. And then like we can also work with you to expand that audience with machine learning and help you target them real time and understanding really who they are. But then also there's identity resolution. And that's something that's really only been available to large enterprises. But, just yesterday we launched, the ability for small to mid-sized advertisers to also use identity resolution through OmniIQ. And so, there's a lot of education that goes into that because, any marketer knows like they might know they have these pains, like third-party cookies are going away and they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. But so we've got to like help them understand that pain educate them, pain inform them, but also, show them how they can get past it and what the solution to that is and how it's actually better than what was in place before. And so, we do, like we call it deconstructing data, and that leaves us available to like really in the beginning, especially when it was harder to find guests, talk really anything data related. So that can really go across a lot of different professions. So we've had a lot of different discussions, but where we try to focus is on data and advertising, first party data, the cookieless future, and identity resolution, and trying to inform primarily American marketers, although we are the top 50 marketing podcast in Japan. So I think like there's a lot of appreciation for, more of the technical aspect of marketing and advertising internationally. It's, Google will deprecate cookies at some point. And even if they don't, they end up changing things, who knows? They probably won't, but but even if they never do, it's still valuable to make sure you're collecting quality first party data and data in a privacy compliant way, and then using that data to find more customers like your existing customers.
And Jessie, so this theme that you're creating and like drawing all these connections, like you mentioned, with your audience, you mentioned earlier that you knew deconstructing data would take some time and it would force you to give up some other things, right? So as a CMO, you have like this pie chart of time for things that you're able to spend time on. So what did you give up in lieu of pursuing the podcast?
We shut down Google Ads, and that saved a lot of budget, and it also saved a lot of time. That's the big thing, is we shut down Google Ads before it was even popular to shut down Google Ads. But, it was just, I didn't see the return there, and there was a lot of spam coming in, and we were, just switching around the website and getting a new website going. So I had all new forms and new pages, and we still haven't gotten Google Ads back up. But I think that, our organic and direct traffic is much more valuable than anything we were ever seeing coming through Google Ads anyway. And a lot of that is attributable. Like, thank you, Chris Walker, for the suggestion to put how did you hear about us in your web form? Because that's what we'll hear, is people hear about us through Deconstructing Data. We got CMO SEM Rush, wanting to come on Deconstructing Data now. That's a big company. Whereas before we were struggling to even in the beginning to find guests. So we have been able to establish ourselves as, thought leaders where established marketers and advertisers want to come on and talk about these things with us because they see them as important too. So I think that, we shut down ads and we went to a more organic content approach.
And what did management, what was their reaction when you said, hey, we're going to turn off this paid channel and we're going to invest some time in the podcasting space where it might take a little while to get traction? How was that received?
I mean, honestly, the way I've described the hesitation that David, our CEO, had on the podcast, it probably sounds like he's wants to push back a lot, but he's always been extremely supportive of my decisions. And I think they like the idea of not spending money on ads if we didn't have to. So that was an easy conversation. I don't ever remember even having to propose that, even have a formal proposal for it. It was just I've talked to sales, we've gone through these leads and none of them are good. So let's just shut this down. Yeah.
And some of those early episodes, I saw that you were actually bringing on internal folks. I believe for the first 4 episodes, you focused on BDEX employees. So what was some of that early feedback that you got, and why did you elect to go internal first for those few episodes?
Oh, good question. One, because finding guests was hard, as I mentioned. So we started up, once we did get guests, they were a lot of my personal contacts or David's personal contacts. And starting with the team allowed us more time to get through all the technical stuff, figuring out what we do. And Michael had technical difficulties on his episode and David became a part of it. Technical difficulties I didn't even experience with Whiskey Wednesday, so just different things. And also just figuring out what was our title, what was our vibe, and kind of getting the team's buy-in from it. So getting them to feel they're part of it from the beginning. And also I wanted it to be a source of sharing information. And we started with our founders and then our C-suite and then the dev team, primarily just them because they can provide so much information. I've been blown away by our dev team since I've started here. They have PhDs in engineering. And, what I learned from that is they're brilliant, but I need to make sure that I come prepared with a lot of questions because they're so brilliant, they're going to answer my questions so very quickly and not rattle on like I'm doing right now. And so, it was a different vibe than Whiskey Wednesday, and that helped me prepare for it. The honest answer was just that we needed to find guests, but we wanted to get going and build a backlog.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, going internal first does a lot of things for you as a team. I mean, it builds some of that confidence, right? And it gives you a chance to work with other people internally and really work out some of those technical difficulties rather than bringing on a guest and then trying to fumble through that stuff. So you kind of get those reps in. And it was different for you because you went from a live event scenario and now you're using, were you using a different tool or were you using StreamYard to actually record the podcast initially? How were you doing that?
The first few were actually on Riverside.
Okay.
But then we moved to StreamYard and started going live just with Deconstructing Data as well.
Okay. So sharing that same approach then
Yes.
across both shows, it sounds like. And Jessie, you mentioned that one of your goals with Deconstructing Data was to get David his personality and some of his voice and his thoughts out into the world. So what was your reaction to some of those earlier episodes where you were able to get some internal folks on? Like, how did it feel to get some of those thoughts like out
Oh
into the world?
man, it was great. Especially, I need to get Michael back on, the other co-founder at BDEX, just because we did have technical difficulties. He was one of the first that we interviewed, but I never really get that chance to like hear him and David just like talk about when they were starting, this company. And then this is actually David's third company, and they've done other companies before. So like they have this long, like, rich history. And so just like hearing their random stories about being in a basement with like, cinder blocks and like the old
Right.
like internet style, like big boxes of like wires and switches like around, like, and envisioning like these stories that they have like are so interesting. It was amazing when, we were able to finally record them talking about these rich like founder stories, right? In B2B, like you think of like Dave Gerhardt, like the founder story. Like for me, this is what that was them like telling us how it all started, and the problems they set out to solve. And how solving these problems at company A, then led them to solve these problems at company B. And how, like, they just have a really great relationship that like, they never fight. So set a great example for me and Eddie, really. Like I have this really great partnership relationship to like look at. So there's that like they humanize BDEX. And so that's what I felt like getting them on tape did for us as a brand. And then getting DW, who is our CTO, leading this amazing dev team, to come on and just like kind of nerd out on, statistics and audiences and have the time to like talk about things that they wouldn't normally talk about. Like it was fun for everybody. And I think that, like I said, it humanized our brand.
And Jessie, as you're capturing those stories and getting the humanizing the brand, like you're mentioning, like how are you then folding that into the rest of your marketing strategy as a CMO?
It like we get so much from it because, we're getting video content, we're getting audio content. And so then that can be repurposed for multiple channels. And, so like just doing this one recording that will leave us set up for TikTok and Instagram and LinkedIn for weeks. And then also we can share it with our guests, and they really like that. And, there's a little bit of time beforehand where David gets to really meet people and then afterwards talk to them again. And a lot of the time we're talking to people who could potentially be customers. And that feels really great as a marketer to be able to like help make these connections, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing, is like getting our brand out in front of our audience. And I think that this is, the way to do that these days, and especially in B2B. I think that's why Whiskey Wednesday resonates so well. Like what we really miss in B2B is that fun aspect, and so Whiskey Wednesday was just created for fun, and it is fun. And I think that comes off. And I think that's why, it's been great to like find sponsors, and people want to put their logos on our show now and help us like build it. They want us to do more. They want more of the creativity. And I think it's because, this is like the future blog. These sort of recordings, podcast or a live stream, I think of them kind of as one and the same, because I think, well, like the live stream or video, like, because even with Riverside, we're not live, right? But you could essentially take this video and put it on social media. That's
Right.
all live is. It's just you don't have all that extra work. So as a side hustle, going live is definitely easier because we don't have all that editing. This is, of course, the more professional way to do it. But, what it does for you is it creates and gives you so much to work with. Like I said, like a video or a podcast is like a blog. That's absolutely true. I think a video is the new form of blog. Like if people want to go learn, they're going to go much rather watch a YouTube video than, read a blog. But then also, like, if we do need to make blog content, you have all that content there. You can just pull the transcript and use a lot of that language to create a blog. So, like, we talk about very complex topics, and being able to pick David's brain and Michael's brain and all our guests' brains on those topics, it helps inspire a lot of what we're doing and saying for our marketing. And it goes, it runs through all the veins of our whole marketing project now, because it helps form our message. It drives what we put on our website, our social content. I think it's become a big part of what people think of the BDEX brand is deconstructing data.
And how does life compare now with having the podcast fuel a lot of the content marketing that you're doing? How does it compare now to what you were doing before the podcast was launched?
That's a great question, because you're right. Well, I'm not saying you're right because you didn't really say this, but like what I think you're getting to, or what it gets to for me, is that the podcast, like Apple Podcasts, all those ones I was mentioning, that adds a lot of value. So as soon as we did that, it opened a lot of doors. Like I said, we're like the top 50 marketing podcast in Japan. And that's on Apple Podcast. So a lot of the activity that we're getting for deconstructing data around the globe, and in the US, is coming from those podcast channels, because not everybody's on LinkedIn or YouTube watching videos. A lot of people really are searching on Apple Podcast or iHeart or whatever podcast they use for words like data or advertising data or identity resolution, and they want to learn about that. And then they start listening. They're like, wow, this is really interesting. I'm just going to, download the entire show. And so it's fun. The analytics on podcasts sort of drive me nuts a little bit. Not going to lie. Like, I wish we could get more, more quantitative feedback in terms of like impressions and all of that I'm used to. But like, you can see that it works, again, thanks to Chris Walker, like dark social, you see it come through, like, but it's when the customer attributes it. Like, I heard you on a podcast, or when a lead attributes it, it's hard to track, but the value is there. I definitely see it.
Yeah. No, I mean, as a CMO, like how do you articulate the value of the podcast to, even the owners or founders of the company? Like how do you package that up and say deconstructing data is working for us?
I think it sort of does it for itself, because David is meeting really interesting people. If we were just calling a lot of these people and trying to make a cold sales pitch, or pitch slapping them, as we say on Whiskey Wednesday, we were just calling these people and pitch slapping them about what we're trying to sell them. Would they want to listen? No. But we're calling them, we're asking them to come on stage with us and come be on our podcast. Like, let us give you something. And it allows us to meet them and just build a genuine relationship with them. So I know that David is already saying he appreciates that. So I think there's not a lot I need to do to really defend it, because that in itself has a lot of value in it. We're building a lot of connections, but then, also hearing those qualitative stories like, hey, the CMO of SEMrush wants to come on deconstructing data. We didn't even ask. Like, we just put out a little thing, and, she was one of the people that like filled out the form. Like, that's awesome. So I think it gives us, like, those sort of things right now give us the ammunition, you could say, from marketing to be like, yeah, this really is attracting a lot of the type of people that we want to be attracting, and we're having those conversations. And even if we're not selling to them yet, they now know about us, and their audiences know about us. And so it's definitely something that will have a longer term value. I think it takes about, like with Whiskey Wednesday, before we started monetizing it, we started in February. It wasn't monetized until September. Deconstructing data, we're not necessarily trying to monetize it or get sponsors. We're just trying to get leads for BDEX and inform our audience about BDEX, of course, at the end of the day. And not just leads, we want buyers, right? So we want people who actually trust us. That's what it does. It helps close that trust gap with our buyers, so that when they do need what we provide, they think of us. And that's what we see with a podcast.
And Jessie, when you're putting this, so I guess to draw a parallel between the live event and the podcast that you have running, in both scenarios, you have a co-host format. So I'm wondering, like, what do you like most about that style from your perspective?
I think the more people you have, then the easier it is to build a larger audience. And with Eddie and I, that's what I was able to see is, like, when we went live, we'd get his audience and we get my audience. Then we'd bring on guests and we get their audience. And then those people will continue to show up. So every week with Whiskey Wednesday, our audience is growing a little bit, just because, like with Justin Welsh last week, we met so many people watch Whiskey Wednesday for the first time ever. And Ross Pomerantz, corporate bro, he has his own audience too. And he brought a lot of interesting people. So, like, I think having more people helps to make a more interesting conversation, and it helps to create a larger audience.
And how do you feel about that leap of faith that you took with Whiskey Wednesday. If you look back at that time period and you were like, hey, I'm going to do this live event thing, I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens. Like, how does it feel now looking back at that moment with what you've done with Whiskey Wednesday as well as Deconstructing Data?
I feel really great about it. I think everybody should go out and start a podcast. It's changed my life. I mean, I shouldn't say just podcast, like Whiskey Wednesday, it's not a podcast technically, even though we call it a podcast sometimes. It's a live event. It's a broadcast. But I think that it's only done great things for me. And it'll only do great things, I think, in the future as well, because the way I see it is personal brands are becoming the way of the future. And podcasts help humanize and tie brands to people, and they help them grow organically. So I think there's a lot of value in it.
And last question here, Jessie, for folks that might be a CMO or they might just be a head of marketing, at a SaaS startup, what would you offer up to them if they're still on the fence as to whether they should, go outside and do something on their own to at least get the wheels turning? Like, what would you offer up to them in order to have them eventually hit the record button?
Like, you can do it. Like, the worst thing that'll happen is you'll stumble and fall, which I did on Whiskey Wednesday and Deconstructing Data. So as long as you just go into it with the expectation that you're going to fail fast, then like with anything, you're going to succeed. I think for most people, it's just recognizing marketing has changed. It's almost 2023. People are consuming content in ways that they didn't used to consume content for. And if you can embrace that and you can be willing to fail a few times, maybe even fail a few other, like I'll go on Whiskey Wednesday, I'll probably stumble tonight. We've been doing it for months, but that's okay. And once I can get past that, and once people can get past that, I think they'll be okay. I think a lot of the time people are just afraid to look stupid, right? They don't want to look like they fumble. Just like that was my fear. I didn't want to make BDEX look bad, but you just have to get past that.
Yeah. And I think, the approach that you took, and it's why I wanted to have the conversation today is I like that step that you took and said, hey, I'm going to do something on my own for a little bit. I'm going to find a partner outside of BDEX. We're going to take this really low risk step to figure out what kind of value these conversations bring. And then once I get the wheels turning a little bit, I'll have a better idea of what we can do at BDEX. And that's, what sparked Deconstructing Data. And now you have these two things going on right now. You have a sponsored live event that happens every week. And then you got this podcast going for BDEX with Deconstructing Data. So good, use case here for a lot of folks, Jessie, I think that are on the fence. They're thinking about like, what is that first step to take to launch a podcast? And I think maybe the first step is really just creating something on your own first and trying to work out those kinks before you bring it to your CEO or founder and launch a larger initiative. So thanks for sharing all of that today. And I'll just ask, like, where can people go to find out more about you? I'm guessing on LinkedIn for the most part, but where else can they go to find you and the other shows that you're running?
Yes, you're right. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also email me at jessie@bdex.com if it's BDEX or Deconstructing Data related, or jessie@reveting.com. And that's reveting. So it's like revenue and marketing blended together. So REVETING. My name is JESSIE.
All right. Awesome. Well, Jessie, thanks for joining me on Recorded Content today.
All right. Thank you so much for having me on. This was a really fun conversation.
Thanks for listening to Recorded Content, a show brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcasting agency for B2B tech marketers. We do the podcast stuff so you can focus on strategy, building brand awareness, and developing new relationships. To learn more about how you can launch and grow a podcast for your company, check out motionagency.io. Thanks for listening to Recorded Content.